Sri Jagannath Charitable Cancer Hospital, Ghaziabad, India. I am moderator for today's lecture. I welcome you all for the fifth lecture of third e-learning program ELP3 organized by SCMPCR. The main objective of this SCMPCR is to organize awareness, prevention and screening program for the cancer disease and to provide adequate training to all personnel associated with the cancer treatment. This is a good platform for teaching, learning and sharing knowledge between young medical physicists. Its motto is to provide quality education and health science for the patient's benefits. Today's lecture is brachytherapy treatment planning, which is delivered by Dr. Jemima Swamidas. In this lecture, we will see strategy and plan evaluation and inverse planning algorithms for the brachytherapy. So I would like to introduce Dr. Jemima Swamidas. She is currently working as an associate professor and medical physicist at Tata Memorial Center, Actract, Mumbai, India. She has 20 years of experience in this field. She has she has published 50 articles in a PubMed Index national and international journals and presented more than 100 abstracts and 6 books per chapters. She is additional editorial board member and reviewer of physics and imaging in a radiation oncology and medical physics, radiotherapy and oncology, IJROBP, JACMP, JCB, etc. She is the task group member of the consultant of various national and international REIT-owned scientific committee in ASTRO, ARB, IAEA, MP, etc. She has supervised many research work and projects with the recipient of various awards. So, ma'am, I would like to call you for the PPT presentation.
Thank you, Madhavi, for that kind introduction.
Please mute your all participants. Please mute your audio. Yeah, ma'am, you can start.
Yeah, but I'm not able to share my screen. I think.
Madam, now you are able to share your screen.
Yeah.
I make you moderator. Yeah, presenter. Thank you, madam.
Yeah, can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am. It's
all right. Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I am really glad to give you some of the practical aspects of brachytherapy treatment planning aspects. There are 2 lectures on brachytherapy treatment planning.
Madam, can you press at the hide option?
Yeah, come back.
Madam, can you press at the hide option in the screen?
Okay. Yeah. Is that okay now? Yeah. So we have 2 lectures on brachytherapy treatment planning. Today is part 1, where we will be discussing about the treatment planning of cervical cancer. I have chosen this topic specifically for part 1 to be discussed in detail because this is the disease which is prevalent in Southeast Asia. And not only that, when we talk about brachytherapy, I think the most commonest disease site that comes into our mind is cervical cancer. And so I thought it is important that we discuss in detail about the cervical cancer first. And tomorrow we will be discussing about other disease sites like breast or head and neck or soft tissue sarcoma that are not uncommon sites in brachytherapy. So this is the workflow of any brachytherapy that starts with the application in the theater, followed by applicator selection, imaging, contouring, applicator reconstruction, definition of dose points, treatment planning, plan evaluation, and then finally the dose delivery. And on the left that you can see that these are the steps that involves in 2D brachytherapy. On the right is the process of 3-dimensional image-based brachytherapy. So if you can see that in application in operation theater, that remains the same irrespective of whether you do a 2D or 3D image-based brachytherapy of cervical cancer, followed by applicator selection. In the olden days, we did not have the modern applicators that are CT compatible, CT and MRI compatible applicators. We only had stainless steel applicators. And also we had only intracavitary, but now we have intracavitary plus interstitial applicators where you can adapt the applicator to the tumor volume. And then in imaging, you had only orthogonal radiographs, but now we have we can use CT and even advanced MRI image-based applicators. And in 2D, we did not have any kind of contouring that will give you 3D information of the organs. But when we have 3D imaging, we have the information of the target, information also about the organs at risk. And so this is what, when we talk about the treatment planning, I assume that all of you are physicists. So when it comes to treatment planning, these are the 4 important steps that we need to take into account. That starts with applicator reconstruction, followed by definition of those points, treatment planning, and plan evaluation. So when it comes to applicator reconstruction, historically we had only X-ray markers, but now if you are planning to do MRI image-based or CT image-based, we must have the applicator commissioning in place. And we will see all these things briefly in detail later. And also the definition of those points. We had in ICRU 38, we had point A, ICRU point, 60 gray volume. But now, even in the 3D image-based brachytherapy, we have point A, ICRU points. We will also discuss that in detail. And then, of course, when it comes to treatment planning, we must also talk about standard loading and optimization. And when it comes to plan evaluation, we had some new points that are proposed by JQSTO and now also endorsed by ICRU 89, which we will see later in detail. So first step in the treatment planning process as a physicist, I would consider is the applicator reconstruction. When the imaging is done, the first process that you do is the applicator reconstruction. There are 2 ways of doing it. One is manual, or it's also called direct reconstruction. And second is applicator library-based reconstruction. And if you are a BBIG or if you're a BBIG user, then it is by default. And for Elekta and Varian user, it can be optional, or it can be a license that needs to be purchased. So what do you mean by direct or manual reconstruction? You must do this manually by clicking the mouse, using a mouse. And for that, what you need to have is a clear visualization of the source channel in a single plane. As you can see here, these are all the curved applicators, and you must be able to visualize the source channel in a single plane. And when you're doing that, check the applicator geometry check the geometry of the applicator that needs to be verified during applicator commissioning, which is anyway beyond the scope of this talk. We need to focus on treatment planning aspects. And also it is especially useful for curved applicators. When you're talking about ovoid or ring, it's very useful. And so what do you mean by curved applicators? Let's say, for example, if you have a ring like this, and it is important that you visualize the entire ring channel in one, so you get a very nice, clear ring reconstruction. On the other hand, if you have ring appearing like this in several slices, then if you are doing a direct or a manual reconstruction, you get a very jagged applicator like this. And this is really not recommended, and that will introduce a lot of error in your reconstruction, which will be catastrophic. And what is the applicator library? Applicator library is nothing but the 3D information about of the applicator that includes the physical outer applicator dimensions, which can be imported and fit on the image through either rotation or a translation until the entire applicator geometry matches the black area of the applicator in the patient images. And this is considered as fast, and it is simple and less prone to reconstruction error as compared to direct or manual reconstruction. So when you are using applicator reconstruction using CT images, I think, which is the most commonly used imaging modality in our radiotherapy clinics as of now, we need not have to use the CT markers to avoid the artifacts. So if you can see, without the markers, the channel is very clear. And so you can directly use this kind of images Otherwise, if you use the artifacts that will mask all the organs and which will actually produce a lot of artifacts, and it is not recommended. So if you're using CT images, you must take care that you do not use the markers and just leave the applicator as it is, so that you will be able to clearly visualize the applicator as well as the organs at risk. However, when you're using applicator reconstruction using MRI images, you should be able to use certain plastic catheters like this, which is filled with water. So when you have a water-filled catheter as marker, you will be able to clearly visualize the source channel, which will be able to help you or guide you during your applicator reconstruction. So what you see here is that these are the old applicators where the channel is narrow, but now you have all these wider bore entrance of the applicator. So these are the 6 French plastic catheters filled with water, in-house made in our department. You can fill it up with water and you can push it inside this, as you can see here. So before the patient gets into the CT scanner, you have to insert this plastic catheters, and then you will get a very clear, neat image that will help you during the applicator reconstruction, so that you will not be able to make any errors during the reconstruction. So that is all about the applicator reconstruction. The next important part of the treatment planning is the definition of the reference points. So according to ICIU 89, there are 2 levels of, in fact, 3 levels of points. Level 1, level 2, and level 3. Level 3 is only for research purposes. I'm not going to cover that now. This lecture will only give you the practical aspects of day-to-day treatment planning. So in level 1, we have point A, bladder and rectovaginal. And in level 2, we have PIPS. PIPS plus 2. The PIPS means the posterior inferior border of the symphysis. And also vaginal point doses at the level of the sources. So these are the points that needs to be reported as per ICIU 89. There are many who actually makes a lot of mistakes, so I thought I will go into the details. We will first learn how to define those two, how to define point A. There have been a lot of definitions of point A in the past, but after the publication of ICIU 89, there is no more confusion now. In fact, it has been adopted from ABS recommendation, that is American Brachytherapy recommendation. So the entire world is now following this definition of point A. It is also to be noted that point A, although originally it was the anatomical point, after ICIU 89, it is not the anatomical point now, but it is the applicator point. So keep that in mind. You will see that how in this slide and also in the coming slides. So how do you define the point? Everybody knows that point A means 2 centimeters superior and 2 centimeter lateral, but from where is the question? So we will learn how to define point A now. The most important thing first is you must be in this plane, that is the mid-coronal and mid-coronal and the mid-sagittal point, where you can actually visualize the applicator in this manner. So the applicator axis must be along the y-axis in mid-coronal section, similarly in the sagittal view. And once if you do that, the next point is connect a line through the center of the each ovoid. From the point of the tandem where this line intersects, extend superiorly along the tandem a distance equal to the radius of the ovoid, and this point is known as the origin. And from here, or if you find it too complicated, it is nothing but simply the surface of the ovoids. And if you find the surface of the ovoids 2 centimeters superiorly and 2 centimeters laterally is where you will define point A. And then now we will see how to define point A in case if you are using a tandem and a ring applicator. So how do you define the origin? you must mark a point from the intersection of the plane of the center of the ring source channel and the tandem, and then move superiorly the distance from the center of the source channel to the superior surface of the ring. Or simply you can call this as the surface of the ring cap. And once if the surface of the ring cap is determined, then you can move 2 centimeters superiorly and 2 centimeters laterally on either side to define point A. The next is, how do you define point A for the vaginal cylinder and the tandem? The superior intersection of the vaginal applicator here and the tandem will be the origin, and from here it is 2 centimeters superiorly and 2 centimeters laterally on either side will be defined as point A. Next, we will see how to define ICRU 89 bladder reference point. Many people make mistakes in defining bladder and the reference bladder and rectovaginal reference points here. Historically, I mean, there is no difference between the definition of bladder point between ICRU 38 and 89. The point is the same. But when it comes to 3D imaging, we always, we have the capability of rotating the images as per the axis of the CT. So it is important now when you are marking the point, you should not be in the oblique plane, but we must be in the body axis. And that is because the bladder reference point lies at the posterior most point of this Foley's bulb, which is filled with the 7 cc contrast material. And so, and also it rests on the posterior most part of the trigone of the bladder. And so it is important that we must stay in the body axis and not in the oblique axis. And this is where I have seen many people making a mistake. So you please take a note of this. It is not also necessary that you will get the maximum dose to the bladder using this point. So this point is being reported as an underestimation. So not necessary that you will find the bladder wall getting a same dose as that of the bladder reference point. On the other hand, the rectovaginal reference point is the most representative point of the dose that is received by the rectal wall. So as in bladder point, you also need to be in the body axis. So you can see this is the, so this is the, so this also must be in the body axis, and this is this point is marked as a 5 millimeter posterior from the vaginal cap. So you can see this is the ring applicator, and this is the source channel, and this is a ring cap. So from here, this is the rectum, and you must see that this is at 5 millimeter posterior to the vaginal cap, and this exactly on the rectal wall. So that's why I said that it is the most, it is the representative point as compared to the representative point of the dose received by the rectal wall. And this point, when you are marking, this is a sagittal section. So when you are marking this plane, it must be either at the lower intrauterine source or at the mid-vaginal source plane. And this is to make sure that you are getting the maximum dose to the rectovaginal point. So if you are not in this plane, then you might report the lower doses, and that is not the worst case scenario that is recommended by the ICRU 89. The next, this is a new point that is recommended by ICRU 89, which is not there in the ICRU 38, and this is called the posterior inferior border of the symphysis, and this will give you the dose that is received by the vagina. So there are newer evidences that are coming up for the vaginal endpoints, so it is important that we also report this point. And how do we mark this point? For this point also, it is important that you are in the body axis. You can see this mascot, it is in the body axis. And once if you are there, then you must draw this, you must have this plane along the posterior inferior border of the pubic symphysis bone. And you must be wondering, why are we doing this? Because many investigators have tried and have reported that the uncertainty of drawing a volume or a 3D structure for vagina, it's extremely difficult. And so you will end up having a lot of uncertainties in reporting these vaginal doses. And so to represent the dose to the vagina, it is not a volume, but the points. This points has also been correlated with the clinical endpoints. So this becoming a very important point after the publication of ICR 89. So this point is marked at the posterior inferior border of the pubic symphysis bone that represents the mid-vaginal point. And from here, you go 2 centimeters superiorly and 2 centimeters laterally. So that will give you the dose to the entire vagina. Vaginal cavity. And then also it is important to report what is the dose received by the vagina. It is not the vaginal cavity, but the vaginal wall. So for this, you need to be at the plane of the vaginal sources. And from here, you mark the points at the surface of the applicator that represents the vaginal dose, maximum dose. And considering that the vaginal mucosa is 5 millimeter, you also report doses to the 5 millimeter from the surface of the vaginal cap of the applicator. And this is how we represent the vaginal points. So that is the end of the definition of dose points. So you have now reconstructed the applicator, and also you have now defined dose to point A, and also defined the bladder point, rectovaginal point, the PIPS point, and the vaginal point. And once when you're done that, the next process is the treatment planning, the actual treatment planning, where there are 3 important steps. One is the source loading. Second is prescription of the dose, or the normalization you call it, and then the dose optimization. So here you must also pay a lot of attention with regard to what is the loading pattern that you are using in your institution. It is not a, this is the pattern that we are following in our hospital with the 2.5 millimeter, with a 2.5 millimeter step size for a 6 centimeter tandem, and for a ovoid of 1.5 centimeter diameter and 2 centimeter diameter. This is the loading pattern that we follow. This is, let us say, source position at 1, 3, 5, 7, etc. And you must be wondering where this loading pattern is coming from. This loading pattern is coming from the radium era. I'm sure that all of you would have an idea of the historical loading pattern of Manchester or Fletcher, where they have introduced 15 milligram radium at the tip of the tandem, 10 milligram radium, 10 milligram radium followed by, and also 17 to 20 milligram radium on either side of the vagina. And when this radium, when LDR was introduced, the same radium loading pattern was adopted to match with the LDR loading pattern. And when HDR was introduced also, the same loading pattern was mimicked. So we do not really want to have a major change or the deviation in the historical loading pattern that we have been following in the last, let's say, 100 years, because this has been time-tested and clinically also it has proven to produce good results. Some kind of deviation, yes, of course, it is allowed depending on your need, based on your target and based on your organs at risk. But more or less, major deviation is generally avoided compared to the historical loading pattern. The next is the point A normalization. I told you how to mark this point, but it's also important that we start the treatment plan with the normalization to point A. That is because when you are normalizing the dose to point A with the standard loading pattern, you get this kind of pear-shaped dose distribution. So you are at the starting point with a very safe dose distribution. So the major modification will actually alter this pear-shaped dose distribution. So this is going to be acting as a starting point. Although point A is not very much related to the dose to the target, this can definitely be a very safe starting point because it has been considered as a robust, and of course it is not dependent on the contouring. Next important point I would like to tell you is that if you are introducing advanced interstitial component into the intracavitary, let's say for example, as you can see here, with you are having an advanced interstitial component of your treatment planning here. And here also you must start your standard loading, you must start your treatment planning with the standard loading pattern. And it is important that you weigh your needles here to 15 to 20% of the interstitial component, because the dominant weighting has to come from the intracavitary component and not from the interstitial component. And further optimization can be used by either manual or graphical optimization, which we will see now. So these are the dose constraints that you must be keeping in mind. These are the new dose constraints that is coming up from the existing clinical evidence. You can see here, this is for the target and this is for the organs at risk. This is a recently published dose constraints. I would highly recommend that you have to go through this paper to have a deeper understanding of how they have arrived at these numbers. Let's say, for example, if you are practicing the target concepts based on the JEC-ISTRO recommendations, you must be able to correlate your clinical outcome with respect to the high-risk target volume and high-risk target volume of D90, D98, which means, let's say, dose to 90% of the target, dose to 98% of the high-risk target. And also we have some clinical evidence for the GTV, D98 and D98, and also to point A. So it's important that we still have to report point A, even if you're practicing advanced MRI image-based brachytherapy system. And what about the organs at risk? You can see here for the rectum, the hard constraint is less than 75 gray for dose to 2 cc. And for bladder, it is less than 85 gray. So similarly, you have a various dose constraint. I would really like to highlight that you see that ICRU rectovaginal point is less than 75 gray and ICRU bladder point is less than 85 gray. So because these points are very important in terms of clinical endpoints, it is extremely important that we must have a good accuracy in defining these points. Otherwise, you will not be able to correlate your clinical endpoints with respect to your dose that you're recording in your clinic. So that's why I said that it is important that we should know how to mark these points. Another important thing you would have noticed in the last slide is that we always report the doses combining brachytherapy plus the external beam radiotherapy. And many questions have been asked previously when I was delivering this lecture, that how do we combine? What is the uncertainty and things like that. So I would like to keep things very simple for you. There are two major criteria that we must keep in mind when you are trying to accumulate the dose between brachytherapy and external beam radiotherapy. One is the fraction size is different and the dose gradient is different. So in brachytherapy, the fraction size is 7 gray per fraction, but in external beam it is 2 gray per fraction. And the dose gradient also is quite different. For example, you can see here, the dose gradient between D98 and D50 of the target, it is 5 gray as compared to 1 gray in external beam radiotherapy. So when you have a different dose gradients across the modalities and also the fraction sizes are different, it is going to be complicated to define, to combine the doses three-dimensionally. And so there are various methodologies that have been tested, but what has been the consensus now internationally is to normalize the dose to equity 2, which is the equivalent dose in 2 fractions, taking into account the LQ model. So what you have to do is that calculate the BD values, which are normalized to conventional external beam dose to 2 gray per fraction. And so you find the isoeffective dose, and which in turn be making it to equivalent to 2 gray per fraction. And once if you calculate the isoeffective dose of external beam radiotherapy plus brachytherapy, you must be able to simply add the doses, which will give you the doses that will be correlating with your clinical outcome. So we do not want to really add the three-dimensional doses because of the complexities that I have explained to you. For the fraction size and dose gradient is different. So we do a simple addition of the doses between the external beam radiotherapy and the brachytherapy. And this is one of the common, I mean, you can even develop an Excel sheet which will take into account the external beam radiotherapy, and the alpha by beta ratios for tumor is 10, and organs at risk is 3. And once if you're you can have the ready-made Excel sheet that will give you a quick calculation of what would be the dose fractionation and what is the tolerance for your clinics that is allowed. So this is a way of clinical practice that will help you in calculating the doses that you're delivering to the organs at risk. Due to the want of time, I will not be able to go into the details of this. But however, I would just like to mention here that in the ESTRO website, you have this Excel sheet, which is freely downloadable. So you can download this Excel sheet, practice this, understand this, how does this work for your clinic, and maybe you can adopt based on the dose fractionation that you follow in your clinic. So the next important step in the treatment planning is the dose optimization. There are 3 ways that you can do. One is the manual dose optimization. Second is graphical dose optimization. It is also called dose shaper. And third is the inverse planning. You must be wondering why I'm not talking about the other optimization like geometric or dose point optimization. The geometric or the dose point optimization we do not do for intracavitary brachytherapy or intracavitary plus interstitial, because I'm talking only about intracavitary for cervical cancer, intracavitary plus interstitial for advanced cervical cancer treatment. We use only manual dose optimization, graphical, and may not be inverse. I will come back to that later. So what is manual optimization? Manual optimization is nothing but simply changing the dwell time or shifting or skipping the dwell positions. This is the most commonly used. I would like to also use this because it is safe. The one point about manual optimization is it requires some experience and skill, but you can be safe, and because it does not really have a major deviation from the standard loading pattern. So this is a loading pattern, standard loading pattern. You have, let's say, for example, the dwell time of all the dwell positions same as compared to manual optimization, where you actually make some few changes of your dwell time that will contribute to, let us say, reduction in the dose to the organ set risk. So this is what is a simple manual optimization. And you can see that there is no major change in the dwell time. And what is graphical optimization is nothing but clicking or dragging the isodoses to the desired location using a mouse. It is quick, easy, but sometimes if you are not careful, it may be dangerous because the standard loading pattern may change, and it might even result in localized hotspots. And also it will result in large gradient of the dwell times, which is really not recommended. What is inverse optimization? There are two broad algorithms that are available. There could be others new coming up, but I'm just going to stick to only these two that are commonly used. It is not about the algorithm, but it is about how does this algorithm work? What are the strengths and what are the limitations? Everybody must understand this before embarking onto the clinical practice. So the inverse planning algorithms provides, you might think, fast and automatic solutions, but they also have certain limitations in terms of, let us say, IPSA, that is marketed by Elekta, produces large heterogeneity in dwell time values, and the clinical impact of this is not known. And also you must be able to draw it requires to draw some help structures around the catheters to minimize the variation of the dwell time, which is really very time consuming and not practical in the busy clinical routine. And later on, they have come up with a new algorithm called HIPPO, Hybrid Inverse Planning Optimization Algorithm, that actually introduces the dwell time gradient restriction that reduces the variation of the dwell time. And if you are using this algorithm for intracavity plus interstitial, you can lock certain part of the dwell time. Let's say, for example, the needle, and that does not actually change the dwell weights too much, but this requires a lot of practice. So if you are a beginner, I really would like to give my recommendation is that you do not use for the clinical practice unless you have good practice, you have very deeper understanding of how these inverse optimization algorithms work as compared to your clinical standard loading pattern plans followed by manual or graphical optimization. So this is a typical example of how does the manual plan, the same plan, manual versus inverse plan. A similar plan you can get with a minor change in the dwell time as compared to a huge difference in the changes in the heterogeneity of the dwell times using inverse planning. So it is really not a great benefit that you get when you're using inverse planning for intracavity or intracavity plus interstitial for cervical cancer. So what are the major challenges before we go into that? The benefit, you might say that you will get faster solution, but at the cost of extra contouring, manual adaptation, normal tissue avoidance. So when I'm saying normal tissue avoidance here, it is not just about bladder or rectum or sigmoid. There are other normal tissue structures. Let's say, for example, there could be some some nerves, there could be some blood vessels, there could be some muscles or connective tissues that are passing by, within the uterus, which will have a very high hotspot. So we are not actually contouring these structures in our routine clinical practice. So if you are dumping those in these structures, which were not historically irradiated, then you may never know what are the clinical impact of these dose volume. So it is important that we try to restrict the deviation from the standard loading pattern to a reasonable extent, so that we don't end up having newer toxicities. So that's why I would like to tell you that you have to have a good confidence and also a good correlation between your historical loading pattern, historical practice of manual and graphical optimization as compared to your inverse planning before you practice this in your clinical practice. Before we actually go into the other things, I would like to give 5 examples of cervical cancer where people actually make mistakes, and these are the questions that I generally get from the students. So I have categorized all types of implants apart from the intracavitary brachytherapy for cervical cancer. Let's say vaginal cancer and vulval cancer. I am just trying to use these kind of notations because it is easier also for you to adapt to various scenarios when you're using such implants. The first example is that when you're using only a cylinder. The second example is when you're using a cylinder and needles. The third example is that you can see you're using a cylinder, vaginal cylinder, you're using a tandem into the uterus, and also you're using needles here. So this is the most complicated scenario. And the fourth is that when you're using only needles, this is a pure interstitial implant. You can call it NUPIT template, Martinez Universal Perineal Interstitial template. And the fifth is the vulval freehand implant. So here you can see that these are the 5 examples: cylinder plus needle, cylinder plus tandem plus needle, NUPIT, and freehand vulval implant. So we have various parameters here to look at. One is the implant type, reconstruction, how to do the reconstruction, how to do the source activation, and what about dose points, how do you optimize, and how do you evaluate, and some tips. So now this is a very important slide, and I'm going to spend some more time on this. So when it comes to implant type, the cylinder is considered as when you have only the cylinder, this is just considered as intracavitary. And when you have cylinder plus needle, cylinder plus tandem plus needle, you have intracavitary plus interstitial. And when you have NUPIT and when you have freehand vulval implant, it is considered as pure interstitial implant. So there are 3 types broadly categorized, and you must use your other parameters based on whether your implant is intracavitary plus interstitial, or a pure interstitial implant. Now let us talk about how do you do reconstruction. Here for intracavitary plus interstitial, you must of course will have a central tandem, and you will have needles. And it is important when you have needles, you must know what is the offset. We have not talked about applicator commissioning. So applicator commissioning information is important for the needle offset. Maybe I think we can cover that later if you're interested. Then the numbering of the needles are also important. These actually look very, very simple, but they're very, very trivial information that one might go wrong during the practical application of the clinical routine. And when it comes to interstitial, the needles are all the same length, so numbering is important. And when it comes to vulval implant, or if you're using a freehand, if you're using the plastic catheters, they all can get crowded, so it's better that you use the color code. So these are all the practical aspects. Not going to the details of that. What about source activation? If you're using MRI, you can delineate the CTV. And if you're using a CT, you can use markers, or you can use surrogates, or you can even use the clinical examination to define your target. What about dose points? You must have catheter-based points from the applicator surface. We will see that now. How do you do this? And for MUPIT or freehand implant, you will see you will have to use the basal points from the Paris system. And what about optimization? For cylinder plus needles and cylinder plus tandem plus needle, you're going to use the dose point optimization. What does this mean? We'll see that later. On the other hand, for pure interstitial implants, you will use the geometric optimization. And how do you evaluate? When you're using these kind of implants, the cylinder or cylinder plus needles or tandem, the uniformity is not an issue, but be careful that your hyperdose sleeve should be within the cylinder and it should be just around the needles. And what does this mean? We will see that now. And here, you also have to keep in mind that your dose homogeneity index must be more than 0.75. And if it is going to be a template-based implant, the geometry may not be an issue. But if it's going to be a freehand implant, then geometry must be very important. Otherwise, you will end up having huge hotspots. So this is actually a summary slide. And if you have not understood any of these aspects, do not worry. I'm going to explain to you now in a few slides. So this is the intracavitary versus interstitial treatment planning approach. So what does this means is that, let's say, so here is the intracavitary plus the interstitial implant treatment planning approach. So if it is going to be interstitial, you are going to define. So these are all the source points, and these are all the basal points here. And your 100% is just around the needles, and your 200% is just around the needles, and your 100% is actually covering the entire implanted volume. On the other hand, if it is going to be only intracavitary, then you are going to position a point here at the surface of the applicator, which is the vaginal cylinder at 5 millimeter. And from here, you use this point as a normalization point. So you can see that 200% is the continuous line inside the applicator, while your 100% line is also a continuous, similar to that of interstitial. So this is a major difference between intracavitary and intracavitary plus interstitial. So this kind of 200% continuous isodose line cannot be acceptable in a pure interstitial implant, because here it is the tissue, but here it is the applicator. Basically, it is the perspex cap. So you have it here. In this scenario, it is going to be intracavitary, and here it is going to be interstitial. So further, I would like to explain to you with a picture that includes dose optimization. Let's say, for example, if you have an applicator here, which is the vaginal cylinder, these are the sources, and this is the vaginal cylinder, and these are the points that you define at a distance from the applicator surface, typically 5 millimeter from the applicator surface. And here, in the case of pure interstitial implants, you are going to have the dose points at the basal points. So this is the basal points based on the Paris system. So these are the points on which you are going to define the dose points. And here, these are the points you are going to define the dose points. So here in this case, you are going to use the dose point optimization. And here in this case, you will be using the geometric optimization. So if you look at the dose distribution, so this is how you're going to look at. Here you can see the 200% isodose line is a continuous line. 150% also is a continuous line. 100% line is a continuous line, as compared to the pure interstitial line. As you can see, the 100% line is a continuous line. However, your 200% and 150% line is just around the needles, because this is the tissue. This is the tissue, but here it is not the tissue, it is just a plastic cap. We don't care about the dose that we are giving to the plastic cap. plastic applicator material, but rather the dose to the vaginal mucosa. So from the surface of the applicator, the vaginal mucosa is at a distance of 5 millimeter. So you must be careful about what is the dose that you're delivering to the vaginal mucosa and not necessarily to the plastic cap material inside. On the other hand, here, everything what you have here is the tube. So it is important that you restrict the high dose sleeve to a minimum, otherwise you will end up with tissue necrosis. I hope I made this point clear. So this is another example, could be a soft tissue sarcoma or surface mold. And here, if you are using multi-catheter breast implants or if you are using head neck implant, this is how you must go about. And these are the various DVH parameters that one must consider when you're using such implants. One is the coverage index. Another is the homogeneity index. It's important. There you will see what is the dose to 150%. It must be more than 0.75. And you also look at what is the overdose volume index and external volume index. But you will really not look more about the overdose volume index or external volume index, but it is very important that you must calculate what is the homogeneity index, because if you are not restricting your hyperdose sleeve, it is you might end up with bad necrosis to the tissues. So to summarize, we have learned in this lecture about applicator reconstruction, where we talked about manual based or direct reconstruction or applicator library. We also have learned how to define point A, bladder or rectovaginal reference point, PIPS reference point, vaginal points. We also have learned about loading pattern, what is the importance of the standard loading pattern, and how to normalize the dose to point A, and why is it important to normalize the dose to point A, and also how to use manual, graphical, or inverse optimization, and also if you are using a pure interstitial needles, pure interstitial implant, how to use geometric or dose point optimization. And we also looked at what is it, how do we report the doses in terms of EquiD2, and also I would like to you to read this seminars in oncology paper, which is based on the Embrace to Clinical Outcome, that will give you an overview of what is the existing clinical evidence now in terms of dose volume parameters and the clinical endpoints. And also we had quite some discussion about normalization and optimization for all types of implants. And that's all I have for now. And thank you very much for your kind attention. I think now we can take up for questions.
Yeah, ma'am, there is one question. Hello.
Yes, I can hear you. Tell me. Yeah, go ahead.
Ma'am, there is one question. What is the role of inverse square law in a brachytherapy?
What is the role of?
Inverse square law in a brachytherapy.
Inverse square law. What is the rule?
Yeah, one question is arise.
Yeah, the dose distribution in brachytherapy is governed only by inverse square law. The attenuation and scattering does play a role, but it is not a major role, because the energy of the radioisotope that we use, let's say for example in high dose rate iridium we use cobalt. So because of the region that is of interest in brachytherapy is only few centimeters.
Yes,
like a maximum, I would say 5 centimeters or so. And so what is more important is the inverse square law through which the dose gets deposited. It is not by attenuation or scattering as compared to external beam radiotherapy. So the dose distribution in brachytherapy is governed by inverse square law.
Okay, ma'am. And one question is where we should normalize the dose in case of ring application.
Point A.
Point A. Okay, ma'am.
Yes.
And
yes.
one question is more, how long does it take to carry out this complete process with the patient? I don't understand.
Yeah, okay. If you are using orthogonal image-based dosimetry, you will not be able to contour, and the optimization also is not quite complicated. So in such a scenario, you will be able to complete the whole process in probably, I think, 20 to 30 minutes. On the other hand, if you are using, let us say, CT, or if you are using MRI images, then you have to delineate the organs,
Yes, ma'am.
target in case of MRI, then applicator reconstruction, then plan optimization based on your target. So all these things probably, I think, is going to take a little more than what it would be doing in 2D. I would say typically 40 to 45 minutes. But if you are an experienced user, you can also finish it much faster.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, one question is more. It is expected to overestimate HRCTV volume in a CT image compared to the MRI image. Can we relax dose coverage as recommended by Gegestro when using CT image for the planning? Question by Deepak Kumar Jha.
Yeah, this is a very good question. This is a research question. As of
Yes, ma'am.
now, we do not have any recommendations on the dose volume parameters for CT. So whatever the seminars in oncology paper that I have discussed with you is purely based on MRI.
MRI.
Yeah, purely based on MRI contouring. However, research is ongoing now, how you have to adapt the concepts of target from MRI to CT. But as of now, it is not yet well established. I think we may have to wait some more years to come out with the strong clinical evidence as we have in MRI.
Okay.
But as of now, it is a research concept.
Okay, ma'am. One question is more. How to find the point A when the ovoid and the tendons are not in a one plane? I think about the again we have to.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, ma'am. How to find the point A when the ovoid and the tendons are not in a one plane?
Ovoid and tandems are not in one plane. Well, which means I would say that they are. I mean, if the application is not good,
yes, ma'am.
Sometimes, yeah, maybe it may be due to anatomy, or it may be due to whatever reason. Then you will end up having, the ovoids not cross-secting the tandem. Then you will have this problem. So in such cases, I think
we have to play with the dwell positions in the point A. Yeah, distance 2 centimeter we have to change and normalize the 98% or 95% or 100%.
Yes.
Like that we can do. Yeah. So
to,
it's a doctor call, I think. He will accept or not accept. It's a consultant decision.
No, I think what I would like to highlight here is that the surface of the ovoids or the surface of the ring must be considered as the reference line, because according to ICRU 89, point A is the applicator reference point. It's not the anatomical point as compared to the original Manchester point. So keep that in mind, and you might have to adapt to these smaller deviations. But what you must always keep in mind is that now, according to ICRU 89, the point A is an applicator point, and the origin lies at the surface of the ovoids. So just, and in case sometimes you might even ask that what will happen if one ovoid is superior and one ovoid inferior, you can take the average of that. So whatever the smaller variations or adaptation that you are doing in your clinical practice, just keep in mind that you stay close to the definition, so that you will not be reporting a big deviation in the point A doses.
Okay, ma'am. One more question is there any problem when applicator is used without covering it with the plastics?
Well, you mean central vaginal cylinder applicator?
Ma'am, I don't understand actually question. Is there any problem with the applicator is used without covering it with a plastics? What is plastics?
Well, see, I see in a central vaginal cylinder applicator,
Okay.
there is a channel. There is a channel, source channel, and that would be either it could be any material like stainless steel, or it could be a CTMRI compatible polymer material,
Yes, ma'am.
or it could be a titanium material. And over that you have some cylinder which is made up of some kind of polymer material. So all the central vaginal cylinder applicator, which is used for vaginal
There has to be some
cancers,
material.
yeah, you will have this central vaginal cylinder applicator.
Yes, ma'am.
Without that, if you use it, I don't think it is recommended.
Yeah. Ma'am, the geometry of the vaginal and the application we have to consider, na? Otherwise the application will be loose without the
it is
exactly.
That's a good point. That's a good point. So so the choice of the cylinder size also is very important. It must exactly fit. Otherwise, you will not be able to reach your therapeutic ratio, because you are just assuming that your vaginal mucosa is 5 millimeter thickness. So you choose the right size of the applicator diameter when you're using the vaginal cylinder, and that's a good point.
Yeah. And next is how much to worry about point A dose when HRCTV is asymmetrically lateral on one side? Good question.
Well, see, I don't know if you got my point correctly or not. I said point A is a starting point. When you are doing an applicator reconstruction after definition of those points, what you must do is that first you do the standard loading pattern of your hospital. Define point A, normalize the dose to point A, and that is the starting point of your treatment planning. When you are done with the normalizing the dose to point A, you go and verify what is the dose to your target and what's the dose to organ interest and all that. Yeah. So what we follow at Tata, I will tell you, if everything is good, if target is achieved, and if the organs at risk are well below the tolerance, we go ahead and treat. We do not do any kind of adaptations. Adaptation in the sense that we do not adapt for the dose to organs at risk, dose to the HRCTV. But there are some clinics who do that. They optimize based on a very tight optimization they do based on the high risk CTV. But we don't do it because I will tell you there is some uncertainty in the delineation of your high risk CTV. Although it has been established quite well by inter-observer variation and all that, it is it's also, I think, quite important how good is your clinic's practice and how well your the delineation of the HRCTV based on the experience of your clinician. So I think there is some learning curve, and if you are very well experienced and quite confident in all this process, I think you can do that. But if you are a beginner and if you are just starting with the delineation of the higher CTV, I do not think that we can, forget about point A and directly, start optimizing on the high risk CTV. I wouldn't be very comfortable with that.
Ma'am, one question is, can you please explain the bladder protocol, empty and filled?
Okay, so what bladder protocol that we follow is that we empty the bladder first, and then we fill in with 50 cc of saline with
7 cc or 50 cc?
50 cc. This is bladder.
Okay.
Oh no,
protocol.
Okay. No, wait a minute. When I bladder protocol, I mean just before imaging. What must be done for bladder? So that is what I am going to say. It is not about the 7 cc Foley's bulb that during the application in the OT. It is not that.
Okay.
That anyway has to be done. But before CT or at the time of MRI, what we do in Tata is that we, using an asepto syringe, a negative suction, you remove the urine. So you make the bladder empty. And once when you're done, then you insert 50 cc with 1% contrast. That I'm not very sure, but I can get that detail later. So 50 cc of saline you inject into the bladder. The purpose of doing that is to maintain the bladder filling at the time of imaging and also at the time of treatment delivery. So once if you're imaged with this configuration of bladder, then at the time of treatment, we don't want a full bladder or we don't want an empty bladder. At the time of treatment also, you reproduce the similar setup where you, as using asepto, you remove the bladder, empty the bladder first, then fill it up, so that the bladder filling remains consistent at the time of imaging and at the time of delivery.
Ma'am, patient is comfortable with during this process of bladder protocol, emptying and the filling?
Yes.
Because
yes,
there is no difference between the application during the CT and MRI and then the treatment process.
No,
it is
no.
perfect.
I think it is. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think she will have any pain or something because you are because anyway it is catheterized. Yeah, so you
Okay.
can actually this is a clinical question and maybe you can discuss with the physician. But as far as I know, this is a routine practice in our department. And it is also important that we maintain the bladder protocol during the imaging and at the time of delivery. Otherwise, for example, if I tell you at the time of imaging, let's say the bladder is empty, and at the time of delivery, if the bladder is full, then the bladder actually pushed down and it comes close to the applicator. So
Yes, ma'am.
you are what the dose that you are recording in the treatment planning is not what you are delivering. So it is important that we maintain a consistent bladder filling at the time of imaging and at the time of delivery.
Treatment. Yes, ma'am. Finish. Thank you so much for a very
Thank you.
interactive and knowledgeable interaction with us. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, madam, for your wonderful lectures, and your excellent teaching skills help all the participants. And I would like to thank all the participants for their active participation and welcome them to our next lecture tomorrow on brachytherapy clinical and special application. All the participants are welcome to our next lecture. Thank you.